Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for Hashtag the U.S. It's Friday, March the 11th, and this is Africa 54.
Russian President Vladimir Putin warned Thursday that Russia would ultimately emerge more potent and more independent after the West imposed illegitimate sanctions.
Well, there's a little mix-up there. The war in Ukraine is intensifying on Friday as Russian forces attack and lay siege to cities across much of the country, bombarding those urban areas with airstrikes and heavy artillery fire. Ukraine is accusing Russian forces of hitting a psychiatric hospital near the eastern town of Izium Friday in what the regional governor is calling a quote here, brutal attack on civilians. The governor of the Kharkiv region says that 330 people had been at the hospital at the time of the attack, some of them confined to wheelchairs or unable to move, and that 73 had been evacuated. The number of casualties is still being established. The Russian Defense Ministry released video on Friday that purportedly shows Russian tanks on the move in the Kyiv region as they prepare for more attacks on the capital. In recent days, Russian airstrikes have increasingly hit civilian targets, including a maternity hospital in the besieged Ukrainian seaport of Mariupol, in which 3 people were killed, including a child. 17 others were wounded. That attack has drawn fierce international condemnation. The United Nations Security Council is holding an emergency meeting Friday on the alleged manufacture of biological weapons in Ukraine at the request of Moscow. Russia is accusing the United States of funding research into the development of biological weapons in Ukraine. Both Washington and Kyiv are denying the allegations. Now, the humanitarian situation in Ukraine is dire as tens of thousands of civilians, mostly women and minor children, are seeking safe passage to neighboring countries. For the most up-to-date information out of Ukraine, let's turn to Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther, who is standing by live in the western city of Lviv. Philip, what do we know about the latest attacks in the west?
Yeah, we don't know at this point whether this is a provocation, whether it's a change of strategy or one-off attacks. But one thing is for sure, the war that so far felt like it was happening in the rest of Ukraine, in a sense, is creeping toward the west, at least with those attacks that happened overnight in 2 cities, in Ivano-Frankivsk and in Lutsk. Now, those are 2 cities that are around 130 to 150 kilometers away from here where I am in Lviv. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, 2 military airports were hit by airstrikes and are now, quote, out of action. The Ukrainian military cannot confirm whether these airports are completely destroyed or what exactly these strikes hit, but they do say that 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the city of Lutsk. Now, those 2 cities in the west of the country, another city was hit overnight as well, though. It's the city of Dnipro in the east of the country. It's Ukraine's 4th largest city and a tactically, potentially very important one for Russia. It was hit by 3 airstrikes last night. And for the first time in a while, by the way, here in Lviv, in a place that seems peaceful, where a lot of refugees have to pass through, and where a lot of humanitarian aid moves toward the east, for the first time, we heard air raid sirens for quite a few days. Again, giving you that feeling that maybe the war is moving westwards rather, at the same time that those attacks on already besieged cities intensify as well.
So would we say that we're seeing a change in strategy here from the Russian side?
Well, potentially. We'll have to wait and see how all of this evolves, whether this is just a reminder, if you will, from Russian President Vladimir Putin that he can strike the west of the country as well, which had felt relatively safe so far, and actually still does, despite those attacks last night. But at the same time, what is happening in the rest of the country is important as well, of course. You know that convoy, that very long convoy of tanks and other military vehicles, that has moved somewhat on the outskirts of Kiev, with tanks moving to the side of the road, inside of cities, inside of forests, maybe preparing for an attack on the city, or at the very least to try to surround the city, as Russian forces have done with other population centers here in Ukraine. At the same time, we are seeing relatively typical tactics and strategies, if you will, from Russia, similar to what might have happened in other countries where Russia has been involved. Syria, for example, where cities have been pummeled by the Russian army because they were not willing to give up. That's happening in Mariupol. That's happening in Kharkiv, both of those Ukrainian cities where the people and the Ukrainian military will not give up, cities that are still being defended and that are being attacked again and again by the Russian army.
Well, Philip, thank you very much. Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther reporting live from Lviv in Ukraine. Now, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris reiterated America's support for its NATO allies in Romania on Friday. This follows her visit to Poland on Thursday, where she also underscored the U.S. commitment to NATO's eastern flank and supported calls for an international investigation of Russia over its alleged bombing of a Ukrainian hospital. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports.
Horrific images from the alleged Russian bombing of a maternity and children's hospital in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, adding pressure on the Biden administration.
Absolutely, there should be an investigation, and we should all be watching.
Following a meeting with Polish President Andrzej Duda in Warsaw Thursday, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said she would support a war crimes investigation. The administration later clarified she was referring to the United Nations Commission of Inquiry to investigate Russia's violations of human rights in Ukraine, not the International Criminal Court, the body that prosecutes war crimes. Neither the U.S. nor Russia is a party to the treaty that created the court. Moscow said the hospital was occupied by Ukrainian militia, a claim many doubt.
This latest incident with the shelling of a maternity hospital in Mariupol is evidence of targeting of civilians. And so it makes sense that ongoing evidentiary collection and investigations begin at this point.
Harris underscored U.S. commitment to bolster NATO's eastern flank, announcing the delivery of 2 Patriot missile batteries to Poland. In addition to its permanent presence, the U.S. has deployed more troops to Poland, Romania, and Germany for a total of 100,000 stationed in Europe.
The presence of Madam Vice President here in Poland is yet another demonstration of U.S. presence in Poland.
Despite tension between the U.S. and Poland earlier this week over a warplanes transfer deal to help Ukraine, analysts say NATO is largely united against Moscow.
Many of us are surprised how well the West has held together, and in the face of a very challenging situation, and frankly, thanks to the leadership of the United States.
Harris met Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Warsaw, both pledging solidarity with Ukraine and NATO. Harris announced $53 million in additional assistance for Ukraine and thanked Poland for taking in over 1 million Ukrainian refugees. On Friday, she heads to Bucharest to meet with leaders of Romania, another NATO Eastern Flank ally. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. troops are deployed in the forested mountains of eastern Poland, just a few kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This puts them in close proximity to recent Russian airstrikes on targets in western Ukraine and could make them a target if NATO were to become involved in the war. Henry Ridgewell explains.
Troops from the US 82nd Airborne Division on the march in the forests of Arlamov in Poland's Carpathian Mountains. The contingent is part of a wider deployment of 5,000 US troops sent to Poland in recent weeks. That's in addition to the 4,000 American soldiers already in the country. NATO is sending a message that they will defend every inch of alliance territory.
The Ukrainian border is just a few hundred meters down this track. And as thousands of American troops conduct exercises in these Polish forests, Russia has been conducting airstrikes on Ukrainian targets just over the frontier.
There are growing fears of an accidental engagement between the US and Russia. A hotline has been set up to avoid that scenario. But there are also fears that NATO troops in Eastern Europe could be targeted in the event of escalation. Russia's President Vladimir Putin last month raised the alert level of his nuclear forces in response to what he described as NATO's aggressive statements.
NATO still is saying that it will not intervene on Ukrainian territory, but increasingly Western weapons are flowing into Ukraine through NATO member states. And it is possible that Putin will, or in fact already sees, such military support, which it has to be said on our side is not particularly controlled or accompanied by careful messaging, as NATO joining the fight. In other words, the discussion to some degree is now about whether Putin would be willing to use tactical nuclear weapons against NATO forces on NATO territory. That would be a new world.
The alliance must not let Putin get away with nuclear blackmail, says Fabrice Potier, a former head of policy planning at NATO.
What will stop Putin from doing the same next time, possibly including against a NATO ally?
NATO has repeatedly said it will not get directly involved in the conflict. Potier says the alliance should do more.
Are we fully aware of the danger of not doing anything? If I look at that recent history, actually the risk of standing on the sideline and clamoring that we are covering the NATO allies back, but our mission stops at the NATO border, that, I think, risk is no longer acceptable.
Ukraine's border with Poland has become the major gateway for refugees fleeing the conflict, but it is also becoming a key strategic frontier, a conduit for NATO weapons heading into Ukraine and a potential future flashpoint. For decades, Ukraine has acted as a buffer zone between Russia and NATO. But if the Kremlin's forces seize all of Ukraine, there is little to separate NATO troops and Russian soldiers. There is no border fence here, just mountains and forests. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, Arlemov on the Poland-Ukraine border.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Russia never wants to depend on the West again. His comments came following a meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart in Turkey on Thursday and in reference to Western sanctions that have targeted Russia's economy since President Putin launched a military invasion in Ukraine. Lavrov spoke on a wide range of issues on the war in Ukraine, including attempts to find a diplomatic solution to the situation before Russia's invasion of the sovereign nation.
Until the very last moment, we wanted to resolve the issue with Ukraine by means of diplomacy. We want a Ukraine that will be friendly, and a Ukraine that will not be threatened with the creation of another Nazi state. A Ukraine that does not want to ban the Russian language, Russian culture, or the Russian Orthodox Church. The West fell silent. It quietened down because it only emphasized that Western Ukraine needs only one thing. So it constantly works against Russia, against everything that's Russian. And now, of course, the reaction of the West to our actions is so completely frenzied. I would say, forgive me for a rude word, it shows that indeed this is a life and death battle for Russia's right to be on the political map of the world with full respect for its legitimate interests. We will fix this problem, and we will resolve it so that we never again depend on Western partners in any way, be it the government or be it companies that are at all guided by the interests of their business, but have become an instrument of Western political aggression against Russia. We will make sure that we never find ourselves in such a situation again, and that Uncle Sam, no one else, can make decisions that are aimed at destroying our economy. I don't want to believe it, and I do not believe it. I will draw your attention to the context of the events that have unfolded in Ukraine in recent years. The events have escalated over the last months and weeks, and the nuclear topic has been thrown into the conversation as is now customary by Western representatives, especially NATO.
Well, that was Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov speaking in Turkey on Thursday. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says his country has been asked to mediate in the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and that he has told his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, in a phone call it should be settled through negotiations. Ramaphosa did not say who had made the request or give more details on how he planned to work with the two sides. There were no immediate announcements from Moscow or Kyiv confirming South Africa's role. Still in Africa, officials say at least 17 civilians are being killed in Sudan's Darfur region in recent fighting. Rival armed forces have battled in the rugged Jebel Moon Mountains in western Darfur state, close to the border with Chad. Fighting has also left dozens wounded and missing, as well as 4 villages completely burned, according to Adam Regal, spokesman for the General Coordination for Refugees and Displaced in Darfur, an independent aid organization. And still in the region, the UN Food Program is warning that more than 70% of South Sudan's population is likely to face extreme hunger this year as conflict and climate-related disasters deepen food scarcity. Since gaining independence from Sudan in 2011, the country has been in the throes of economic and political crisis and is struggling to recover from a 5-year civil war that left nearly 400,000 people dead. Millions of South Sudanese are already battered by floods and a resurgence of conflict. And U.S. officials say military investigators found that poor leadership, inadequate training, and a culture of complacency among U.S. forces undermined its efforts to fend off a 2020 attack by militants in Kenya that killed 3 Americans. The attack also wounded 3 people, destroyed 6 aircraft, and killed at least 6 insurgents.
First, an inadequate focus on potential threats and force protection at multiple levels. For a number of successive years, there was complacent leadership and command and control at the tactical level and poor oversight at the operational level. Second, there was an inadequate understanding of the true threat to the base at Manda Bay that had been perpetuated by years of local threat assessments. There were also shortcomings identified in the resourcing, sharing, and dissemination of intelligence. Third, there were deficiencies in the organization, preparation, and training of security forces, which contributed to inadequate defensive plans. Fourth, there were problems with mission command, including poor unity of command at the tactical level and flawed staff processes that failed to account for the growth of CSL Manda Bay from a training base to a counterterrorism support and air base. As I said in March 2020, we were not as prepared at Manda Bay as we needed to be. Security on a key part of the base proved inadequate, with a security force that was insufficiently prepared for their mission.
The pre-dawn assault triggered a lengthy fighting and day-long struggle for U.S. and Kenyan forces to search and secure the base. Well, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Still to come in our entertainment report, music from the One Beat program in Algeria.
Season 2 of the Basketball Africa League is here. After a historic inaugural season, 12 national champions from across the continent are ready to compete for the 2022 BAL Championship. From March 5th to March 28th, tune in and follow the BAL on Voice of America. 54 countries, 12 teams, 1 continent, but only 1 champion. Game on!
Well, International Women's Month is celebrated each year in March. Today, we will talk about African women who have risen to positions of influence across the continent and made a difference in various fields. To tell us more, I'm joined live via Skype from New Jersey by Yetunde Ogbesan-Umede, Professor of Global Affairs and Politics at Farmingdale State College. Welcome, Dr. Yetunde. Well,
thank you so much for having me.
Yes, now, most times when we have such a month, it's easy to focus on the trials and tribulations of the African women. But when you think about our mothers or sisters and our daughters on the continent, what comes to your mind about how much has also been achieved up to this point?
I think it's a story of really resilience. I think African women have continued to find their voices in places where their voice was not welcome at the table. We are seeing an increase of women joining the political scene, women who are using their platforms in grassroots levels to really speak truth to power and to talk about many social issues that they have been impacted by, but have not been at the table to make policies that directly impact them. So I think we're seeing a surplus of more women using their voice, using their background, using their expertise, all the way from the market women all the way to their government office, who are carrying the mantle of making sure that their voices are heard at the decision table.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it feels like, or what impact does it have when an African woman sees, for example, the WTO Secretary General is an African, the President of Tanzania is a woman? I mean, tell us what you think that has an effect on the African woman.
Representation does matter. So when young African women and young African girls are able to see themselves in positions of power in places where decisions are made for a multitude of people, I think it has what we call a ripple effect. So more young girls and more young women are aspiring to be more than just their environment, more than just what the society and culture expect them to be, and have been able to strike that balance between the demands of their culture and maybe their religion and tradition with aspiring to be more and aspiring to rise up in the ranks of their political positions and their, background. So I think that representation is so important, especially on the African continent, where oftentimes culture and tradition impedes women from rising up in the ranks.
Yes. Now, very briefly, do you think it will help a lot if those who have achieved or who are doing great things were talked about more, were highlighted more?
Absolutely. I mean, sharing one story is really just what we call like a guide for other people and for other young women. So when you are able to hear women who have achieved such greatness talk about their story, talk about the setbacks that they have encountered to get to where they are now, I think it serves as not only an inspiration, but also a manual and a roadmap for other young women to follow.
Well, and you're one of those role models. Thank you very much, Dr. Yetunde.
Thank you so much.
Yetunde Ogbesan-Umede is a professor of global affairs and politics at Farmingdale State College, Department of History, Politics, and Geography. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, the One Beat program in Algeria is sponsored by the U.S. Embassy in Algeria and the government of Algeria. Reporting from Algeria again this week is Music Time in Africa, Heather Maxwell. And there we go.
One Beat Sahara, Algeria. 23 musicians from 7 countries in the Sahara region and in the United States collaborate to create new works, to explore the African diaspora, and to celebrate Women's History Month, Black History Month, and diversity and inclusion. I've got you covered. Music Time in Africa. Hello, this is the One
One Beat Sahara Festival in Algeria. I'm going to be speaking with people in the audience to find out what they're feeling about being here and to show you some of the amazing performances.
You know, the preparation started like 2 months ago when the idea was posted, and the preparation maybe in 2 weeks we started to prepare clothes, events, so on, tickets, everything, and everything was, as I said, fully sponsored by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, this is just beginning, but it looks amazing to me. How do you feel about it so far?
Well, I couldn't be more excited. We started this program almost 3 years ago when I first arrived. We had to delay it because of Corona, but also it was just a really, really big, complicated program, bringing people from 7 different countries here to Algeria in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the desert to do this festival. And so to finally have it happen 3 years later, it almost makes me want to cry. I'm a musician. I play the flute for fun, but it's not just about a love for music. It's really about the important role that culture and music specifically plays in bringing people together from different countries, from different ideologies, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, race. Music really is the language that unites us. And so this kind of program is more than just the music. It's also the building of community and bringing people together.
En accompagnant déjà notre fils et puis être dans le festival, écouter de la belle musique qui est pratiquement un partage entre les cantines. Hein?
We are super happy to be here because Territ is a famous place, and also to share our culture is something that we really need in those hard times. And I think we are very close in the music, and we can really do something very nice.
And then I'd like to give a shout out to my girl Nancy Viva!
It's been really magical. I've been loving watching everyone fall in love with each other musically. We've got 2 main themes. One of them is silence of the desert, and it doesn't necessarily mean silence, but more of listening to the space and the surroundings around you. And the second one is the diaspora and the music of how the music of Africa went to the U.S. and then brought back in certain genres, and finding the connections with that between the American fellows and the African fellows.
We had a member of our group that contributed heavily to just that, but she is not here with us.
I hope you enjoyed that concert in Tahit, Algeria. Listen, there is more to come. We've got concerts in Algiers. We have interviews with artists, all coming up on Africa 54, Music Time in Africa. I'm Heather. See you next time.
Thanks a lot, Heather. And that's our show for today. From all of us in Washington, enjoy a great weekend ahead.